Over to you, Paul. Thank you.
Hi everyone, let's get going. A warm welcome to Eden's first ever Festival of Discovery, which is all about connection and communication and community. And so here we are kicking it off. And what a better way than to start the festival by a good conversation about plants. So in this Gardener's Question Time session, I'm delighted to introduce our expert panel. So coming in addition to our own team, is someone who doesn't need much introduction. That's Matt Biggs. He's star of Radio 4's Gardener's Question Time, author, writer, broadcaster.
Enough.
Written a great book about Eden gardening as well, Matt. and also another Q man, Waheed Arshad. Waheed really is a botanist. His speciality is seeds, which he believes, well, he knows for a fact, are time capsules for living plants. And he's also very much involved in the horticultural app Candide, where he's training up a team of botanists to answer all our online questions. And lastly, Catherine Cutler, who has been my colleague here at Eden for 20 years. She's an expert in warm temperate and humid tropic plants. She'll be able to answer any questions, though, in gardening that you field her. I haven't introduced myself. I suppose I should. I'm Paul Stone, and I'm head of horticulture at Eden Project. Without any more ado, Colin, let's get stuck into the questions. I should introduce Colin, who as well is also an expert gardener at Eden, and he'll know what he's talking about as well. So good morning, Colin.
Morning. So the first question, Paul, is, and panel, with lockdowns across the UK, people are spending more time at home and in their gardens. What could they be doing to bring a little colour, flavour and scent into their gardens or into their houses at this time of year?
It's good to be got going. Now, I'm not going to do what I said I was going to do. I'm going to pass this straight over to Catherine Cutler, who knows an awful lot on this particular subject. And anyway, I've got other questions lined up for Matt next.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Thank you. It is absolutely wonderful how this year, because of all of the things that are going on, so many people have engaged with gardening. This has had an entire revival. People that have never gardened before have been out there and have the joy of gardening. But of course, now it goes into the winter. It's a harder time to perhaps know quite what to do. But when we think about the winter, we also think about Christmas. So immediately I'm thinking we can bring some of what we enjoy outside, bring it inside. So we can see colour in the hedges and in our gardens. We can see berries, and we can bring some of that indoors to enjoy it. We can also think about scented plants as well. There are quite a few plants that have flowers in the winter, and although they are small and diminutive and often white, they add a real hit of intense sweetness. And one thing I enjoy more than anything else in the winter is going outside on those odd, still calm days when it isn't raining and enjoying those flowers, which are very, very different to the big blousy, showy things that we see in the summer. I don't know if that answered the question, but there's a start.
Could I just come in with a couple of lovely shrubs? The Mahonias are wonderful for flowering during the winter time. Particularly the Mahonia charity, which flowers really sort of February time, produces lovely spikes of lemon-coloured flowers. Looks like a prehistoric plant. It's amazing. Produces stems from the base like great thick fingers with gnarly bark on them, and then it's rosette of leaves at the top, and it's almost like the cherry on the cake with these lovely yellow flowers. And of course, that's a great winter source of nectar for the bees. And I think one of the most popular winter flowering plants is Viburnum bodonentense dawn, and dawn is planted sort of all over, but there are some plants you go, well, why ever has this been planted so widely? but you know why this one's planted widely, because of this gorgeous fragrance in winter. And of course, with it flowering when there's no leaves, because it's deciduous, it means you can see the flowers, little tiny clusters of waxy pink flowers on the tips of the stems. And the fragrance is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary, right from November to March. So for a value for money plant, it's brilliant. And with that, if you want to extend the flowering season, then try planting early clematis or some of the clematis hybrids through it, those that are not too vigorous, to add to the season of interest. And both of those plants are really easy to find in the garden centres.
Waheed, you got anything for us?
Yeah, no, I think bringing in colour and scents is also great, but also think about some of the activities that you might think that you could do while you're spending time inside. And one of the great things that I think is great for families as well is sowing seeds. So you'll hear a lot about seeds from me because I love them so much, but it's a great way to relieve stress and remain mindful of your surroundings. So, I mean, sowing anything that you fancy, from annual herbs that can be used in cooking, or even flowers such as cosmos and sunflowers, really brightening up your indoor spaces, and even vegetables that can lead to nutritious meals later in the season. So, and sowing seeds indoors is very easy, and it's a great way to get engaged and fill your time, become busy, and get the kids involved as well. And using simple tools such as a seed tray and a propagator, if you have one, but even pots that are filled with peat-free compost and covered with a bit of cling film will also work really well. So really trying to think about some of the indoor activities that you can do as well.
Thanks, Waheed. From a personal point of interest, I'll let you into a little secret thing that I do around about this time of year, because they're still on the plants and they're just right to eat. It's a very strange thing to do, though. Any of you that know the pheasant berry, Lacesteria formosa, by now starting to go over, the little black berries, pop one of those into your mouth, fantastic taste of burnt toffee. It's really unusual. I would suggest not eating too many of them. I doubt the medical detail is you know, sort of fully approved, but it certainly hasn't killed me yet. Colin, next question, please.
So, second question, Paul, is houseplants are really on trend at the moment. Can you tell us why they are so important to our health and well-being, and how we can keep them healthy? Can you each recommend a low maintenance houseplant?
Okay, well, Matt, this is definitely a Matt Biggs question.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you. Houseplants, well, research has been undertaken at NASA and recently revisited, I believe, and they found out that when we paint our houses or bring in a lot of products, there are chemicals released from them. And of course, these aren't very good for us. So a lot of them will affect our health. You get sick building syndrome, lack of light, all these kind of factors. But if you bring plants in, particularly, say, for example, the Sansevieria, the peace lily, they're two of the sort of the top plants for extracting these chemicals from the air. So bringing in plants into the house, I think, recreates our natural environment. If you go into the tropical biome at the Eden Project, or you go into the Mediterranean biome, whenever you're surrounded by plants, it feels as though you feel at peace, you feel calm, that lovely colour green. And of course, all the plants are taking in the chemicals, absorbing them. You're breathing out CO2. They're going, oh, fantastic, that will help us to grow. And out they breathe oxygen for us. So it actually helps to refresh the building that you're in. So I think on a psychological level and on a physical level, houseplants are really, really important. So if I suggested one easy to grow, it would be the peace lily. Again, easy to buy. Put it in a sort of a position, not in direct sunshine. It will cope with quite a lot of shade or dappled shade. Keep the compost moist. Reduce the watering during the winter, and only feed with general houseplant fertilizer during the summer months when it's in active growth. And if it does start to sort of lean and grow towards the light because the light source is nearby, same for all your house plants, turn them a quarter of a turn sort of every other day so you get nice even growth.
Waheed, any ideas from you?
Yeah, actually, I think I agree with Matt. I mean, the scientific benefits of growing plants is really growing. I mean, the research is always being undertaken, and it dates back quite a number of decades now. And in terms of one of my favorites, I actually love ferns, and they can be a little bit tricky to grow, which is why I prefer growing them actually in a terrarium, which you can probably just about see behind me. And terrariums are very easy to make yourself. All you need is essentially a glass vessel, some small stones at the bottom, and basically a thin layer of soil in which you can plant some things like ferns. And the reason why terrariums are good for ferns is because they contained in a moist, high humid environment. So if you don't have that at home with things like central heating and kind of bright sunlight, it creates very dry conditions in the houses. So creating a terrarium has that added benefit of high humidity, which ferns of course love. So for me, if I recommended a plant, it'd be a fern. And behind me, I've actually got maidenhair fern, adiantum, and I've also got a Boston fern, which is Nephrolepis. And yeah, ferns in a terrarium, give it a go.
Thanks, Waheed. Sadly, for myself, I'm going to recommend the Kentia palm, because as yet, I don't think I've found anyone that can kill them off, even me. They're fine in shade, semi-shade, and I love their architectural shape anyway, but I tell you what, Catherine will have far better ideas on palms than me.
Actually, Paul, I was going to recommend really bog standard, the Boston fern, which Waheed has already mentioned as being so easy but brilliant at cleaning the air. And the thing I love about the Boston fern is that it's vigorous and it can be put in a pot quite high up in a room, so you can have a plant trailing down, which I think is wonderful. And it has very, very long arching leaves, which can come down sort of like 4 foot down the side of a bookcase, so you can add sort of elevation to your planting design indoors.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. Colin, next question.
Okay, question 3. It's gardens come in all shapes and sizes. How can one make the best use of small spaces such as windowsills and courtyards?
Well, I'm going to be self-indulgent here and get stuck in first on this one. So obviously, being involved in designing gardens, often some of them quite small, enclosed spaces in inner cities, walls are very important. There's a lot of increasingly good technology available and equipment available to be able to grow plants in pockets on systems with irrigation on them up your walls. You have to have the right sort of walls, and you have to be able to deal with the excess water from that growing. But you know, you will be familiar increasingly with vegetable walls, and some of the big ones that you can see are in the centre of cities. There's been one in a shopping centre in Shepherd's Bush for an awful long time. There's a hotel in the West End, you know, and Patrick Blanc, books by him are very good, because in particular he's growing them in the tropics, where it's a damn sight easier to grow vegetable walls because of the humidity. So that's growing plants on walls. And actually we've grown strawberries quite nicely, but heuchera, carex, ajuga, these are plants that are pretty good in growing in those little pockets, and they look great, and you can grow produce. On a general subject though, in terms of if you're doing landscaping or gardening in a small space, use small units. So instead of great big paving slabs, use small cobbles or something like that to reduce, you know, it'll make your garden look bigger. Waheed, what do you say?
Yeah, completely agree. I think you'll be surprised to actually think about how much you can grow in small spaces, especially when you're growing things in pots. And I always like to think vertically. So think about sort of legumes over arches, think about sort of baby vegetables and try to avoid things that take or require a lot of space and time to grow. So it's great options for getting creative, I think.
Catherine.
Yeah, I would say think about each season through the year. If you've only got a small space, ensure that there's a little bit of space that gives you winter interest, a little bit of spring interest, which clearly can come from bulbs which become dormant for the rest of the year. So all your interest isn't just at one time of year, and using a fair few evergreens which give good texture all year round. So if you're in this small space, you can enjoy it at any time of year.
What have we missed, Matt?
Well, I think you've covered pretty well everything. One thing that I like to do in small spaces is to buy cheap terracotta pots, and then you can paint them and bring colour. Because I think one of the nice things is to actually not just have the plants providing structure, but also to have your containers. So I've stopped doing it now for reasons I can't tell you, but I used to buy a lot of these cheap terracotta pots, buy testers from the DIY stores or something like that, because you don't need a lot of paint for the smaller ones, and paint those all up in funky colours. Look out for wine boxes, any old wooden boxes, anything that brings colour, shape and structure and energy into your garden, and you'll find that having colour rather than just straightforward terracotta pots brings real energy to you at all times of year, particularly this time of year when the light is lower. You've got to get your energy from colours, so the brighter colours will give you really good vibes.
Thanks, Matt. Colin, next question, please.
As winter draws in, it's not always easy to go outside. What are your top tips to make gardening fun, budget friendly and for all ages? Okay,
Waheed, tell us what we do.
So I think with my interest in the natural world kind of more generally and the garden ecosystem, for me, one of the best things you can do at this time of year is think about wildlife friendly gardening approaches in terms of bird feeding. So feeding the birds is a great way to kind of entertain yourself, especially during lockdown or even if you're self-isolating at home. And one of the great things that makes it fun and budget friendly is that you can make your own feeders, and you can make your own bird food as well. Actually, make things like fat balls you can do yourself, and you can think about reusing recycled containers or old milk cartons and things like that. And if you buy food from a local supplier or kind of avoid some of these cheaper seed mixers that are less likely to attract garden birds, things like sunflower hearts are great. You can really attract a whole range of species in the garden and really bring some fun into it and something different as well. And if you've got children, you can learn about the birds that visit the garden and also even buy a book to help you learn more about these amazing species. And even if you're sort of kind of restricted with space, you can even hang them near windows so you can see regularly what birds are coming, and it's great fun as well. So that would be my recommendation for a really family-friendly activity at this time of year.
Thank you. How about you other two?
Could I just chip in with the berries? Because I noticed that on the chat, Val Wilkinson says, don't forget when planning for winter gardens to plant berry-bearing trees and shrubs. And I think if you can have those in a position, say, well, your kitchen window, your lounge, the major windows that you might stand looking out of, and get those berry-bearing plants, good old doers like Courtyards. If you plant Sorbus orchiparia, the mountain ash, you might find that you're lucky and waxwings come and visit them. So anything with berries on there, euonymus are absolutely great, euonymus europaeus, deciduous plant, great autumn colour, fantastic flaming autumn colour, and then these most extraordinary berries in pink capsules with orange seeds that the birds will eat, and then things like even good old Rosa rugosa, a bit of a nasty plant as far as the spines are concerned, great autumn colour again, lovely flowers. It's the kind of plant that will grow anywhere, but it produces lovely fruit in the winter, great fat hips that split open and are full of seeds, and again they're for the birds. So I would say you can, if you provide these sources, and pyracantha, of course, pyracantha, very spiny plant, produces masses and masses of blossom in spring, and then he's covered, absolutely covered in berries, red or orange, according to the varieties that you choose. And again, that'll be a really good nectar source for the birds, and also will provide nesting sites. So I think when, you know, winter birds, as Waheed has so rightly said, you know, there's so much of interest to bring in. The birds need the food, and then if you plant up for that, they will come in. And don't forget to provide them with fresh water every day too.
Catherine?
One thing I would say is, as we go into this time of year, just to be kind to yourself. If it's tipping down with rain, don't make yourself go outside and get wet and cold. There will be another day. So find something inside to do. And then when there's a nicer day, enjoy that time outside and just don't beat yourself up about it. And when I say about doing things inside, at this time of year, you can start exploring. Like Candide has a great online presence where you can explore other gardens and find places and have a look around, so that next year, hopefully, when we're out of shutdown, you'll have a whole long list of places that you want to visit. Start trawling through seed catalogues, thinking about what you're going to be growing next year. There's lots of indoor garden planning to do at this time of year for those wet, horrible days where it's best to stay inside.
Hey, Catherine, as well, don't forget,
Yes.
get yourself a greenhouse, because that's a great place to potter as well.
I forget, Matthew, because I have huge greenhouses. I forget, yes.
Yeah, I was on the same lines as Catherine, not to go out at all. And in terms of like inspiring children, young people, novices, I think it's just the wonder of being able to grow something for yourself from seed in a mini propagator. And miniature gardens, you know, maybe take out a few little seedlings and try to grow on very thin soil, just in any sort of trough. Could be a recycled plastic container or something, you know, as long as you can get irrigation, as long as you can water it and it drains. Then actually at last Christmas's Christmas party, did they ever happen? At the Secret Santa, I won this, and so I could be growing living stones, lithrops. So there's lots of things that you can grow, but maybe just cress or bean shoots. Those are the easy things, my level. Colin.
Okay, what are your top gardening tips and tricks indeed for December, January and February?
Matt, what do you say?
Well, I think Catherine's already alluded to this, because this is you know, if you've not done it already, and you certainly should be doing it now, is to go through the catalogues and check on the internet. And I'd like to also flag up, sorry, to buy seeds. I didn't finish the end of my sentence. To buy seeds ready for next spring. But one of the things that I'd really like to flag up is the small independent seed companies, and there's loads of them. If you start looking for through these small seed companies, then you will find some amazing varieties. So certainly do that. During the winter time, I think it's just a time for sitting back, thinking, reflecting. But if the weather's okay, get out in the garden, do a little bit of tidying, rake up those final leaves and stack them. Make sure, by the way, that if there is a sort of pile or anything, that you leave the piles just in case the hedgehogs or any other wildlife has actually taken refuge in there. But I think in the wintertime, it is just a matter of tidying up and planning. If you get warm weather, then you'll find that there are a lot of weeds that will grow at low temperatures. One that really springs to mind is hairy bittercress. That will grow at very low temperatures. So make sure that you go out and hand weed those out, particularly out of your veg plot and out of your pots. So make sure that you keep on top of weeding so that they don't produce seeds over the winter ready for the following year. But I think you should still, you know, when the weather's okay, get out there and still look at your garden, because we don't visit gardens particularly in winter, but it's a great time for seeing the structure of a garden and the layout, the bones of it. And that is very exciting too. So, you know, keep the excitement, keep the energy going through wintertime, because once you get to sort of end of January, definitely into February, you'll need to have some momentum to get going again.
Yeah, I mean, it's the business end of the year really in the garden, isn't it? You know, it's the end of the previous season. Things need to be tidied, and it's your opportunity while the plants are dormant to do things with them that you can never normally do. So, you know, hard pruning, that's when you want to start getting stuck into it in December. Plant division, you know, making more of your overgrown herbaceous plants. These are all critical things. And for later on in the season, you can get earlier displays of summer bulbs by planting some of those agapanthus bulbs in February time. So bear in mind opportunities there for lilies and eucomis, that sort of thing. You could be planting early with your bulbs. Catherine, what do you say?
Yeah, one thing that we try and do here at Eden at this time of year is think ahead for what we're growing next year, and to think about what will we need to ensure that we have a great display. So do we need bamboo canes? Do we need to build some structures? Do we need to increase the height of a wall? Do we need to get hold of some timber? To get all those things in place over the winter, put things together, sharpen up our tools, make sure that we're properly prepared, so when we get to the spring and we're flat out gardening, we don't have to waste that precious time going to, say, the garden centre to buy some tools.
Thanks, Catherine. Waheed.
Yeah, completely agree. I think it's a great time while things are dormant to be thinking about things like Catherine mentioned, cleaning pots, cleaning your tools, making sure your water butts are properly functioning, your greenhouses are well maintained. And it's a great time to be, as I say, planning ahead and really doing a bit of tidying up, organization, and looking forward to things bursting to life come spring.
Yeah, and something that springs to my mind as well, because I just walked past them on the way to work this morning at our foundation building at Eden Project. Planted in the borders at the entrance are plants like Chimonanthus and Sarcococca humilis, fantastic winter flowering plants, fantastic scent from both of them. And this being Cornwall, of course, it's they're always flowering much earlier than anywhere else as well. So they're great plants to have. Now, if you stick those type of plants into pots near your front door or back door where you're passing by, then it's instant pleasure time with those fantastic scents. So that's my recommendation.
Hey, Paul, I'm glad you've mentioned Chimonanthus praecox, because that's my favourite, with those lovely little waxy bells that you can see so clearly. They look like little fairy bells. They're absolutely beautiful. And the fragrance is so spicy. You know, it takes you to this, you know, to spice markets. It's a most extraordinary fragrance. And of course, if you put it by by a door or by a window and open the window, then that will drift into the house. Somewhere where there's a lovely sheltered spot. It's a great place for fragrant plants. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that one. It's made my day.
Oh, great. So let's see whose else day we can make, Colin.
Okay, the next question is, what are the best vegetables to grow in winter?
That goes straight to Matt.
Well, vegetables for winter, I'm not quite sure whether you're talking about things to grow for winter or in winter, but obviously if you're growing for winter, things like the Brussels sprouts and all the traditional ones, you know, the cabbages, the kales. But if you wanted to start sowing now, it's sort of touch and go. It's sort of fractionally too late. If you're sowing things for the winter, like radicchio and a lot of the winter vegetables, you'd start sowing them July and August, so they get to a reasonable size for harvesting later on. But this year, as it's been so mild, and particularly because it's in the greenhouse, I'm going to try some later sowings of oriental veg. Oriental veg are really great, sort of mibuna, pak choi, komatsuna. Trying those in the greenhouse and also out in the veg plot under cover. And so I'll sow those in rows in the greenhouse border, and given some warmer weather, they should germinate and grow, because the conditions at the moment are reflecting in many parts of the country the conditions that you get sort of end of February, March. If you don't have sort of greenhouse or a border, then put them in a sheltered wall and against the base of a sheltered wall, and use your old growing bags from last year and try sowing then. So I think you can also try winter lettuce, sort of 4 seasons, which is absolutely great. and just grow those as cut and come again. So once they're about sort of 3 or 4 centimeters high, then you can cut them with the scissors. You may at this time of year only get 1 cut from them. It all depends on how the weather is in your area. If you're in a mild part of the country, then during the warmer periods, you'll get regrowth on those cut and come again. But I would say go for the cut and come again. And if you've got a greenhouse, try the Oriental veg undercover now. But really for next year, you're much better to start sowing August, September, ready for plants for the winter, which are of a decent size that you can just take 1 or 2 leaves off several of them. And they will actually, of course, then continue to grow, as I say, during the warmer periods, and you'll get an erratic crop through the winter, but you'll certainly get something. Something else to do is this: if you've got a great big clump of rhubarb, sort of hack a piece off the side of the rhubarb, put it on the surface of dig it up, obviously, put it on the surface of the ground, let the cold get to it for about 6 weeks or so, and then put it in the greenhouse, and then an old bucket or something like that, get it watered, and then that will start to grow. And the other things that you could do is take up clumps of parsley, pop those on, they will continue to produce leaves. And also if you've got some mint, dig up a load of mint, put it in a shallow seed tray, and then again, that will continue to produce over the winter time. So you can sort of adapt what's going on outside and kickstart them into the winter.
Wow, Matt, can you come round to my garden and sort it out now? No. Fantastic.
I've got my own to do.
I bet, Catherine, you've got something up your sleeve for us.
Yeah, I'm just thinking a few other things that might be worth trying in the winter would be some broad beans, lamb's lettuce, rocket maybe. But I can remember as a child, I grew up on a farm and we grew hundreds of acres of potatoes. But in the winter, my dad would go into the 6x8 greenhouse and plant some super early potatoes. And that would be around Christmas time to get some really early ones. So it won't be long before we're getting to that time of year. So if you want to try something a little bit different, that might be a suggestion. And also don't forget, if you don't have a greenhouse, there's always windowsills, and you can always sprout seedlings on windowsill, grow lettuces on a windowsill through the winter. So imagine having some freshly picked lettuce for your Christmas salad.
Waheed, you're based at the Newt, aren't you?
Not far from the Newt, actually. Yeah, the Newt in Somerset is our main partner gardens, which some of you may have visited. They do have a lot of produce at this time of year, but I think Matt and Catherine have covered a lot of it, actually. It's so much there for people to get inspired by. Yeah,
I'm not going to chip in on this either. So we'll move on to the next question, Colin.
Okay, so the question is, I think I over-pruned one of my potted oleanders. Will it spring back when I pot it on into a bigger container with fresh compost? And any advice on best liquid fertilizer?
Well, I think this one should go to Catherine.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about hard pruning back an oleander. They do sprout quite happily from the base. If you've potted it on, given it a little bit of fresh compost as well, it sounds to me like you're all set for getting a nice bushy amount of growth coming up in the spring. At this time of year, you probably don't want to be giving it any liquid feed, but once it's in full growth in the spring and through the summer, some liquid feed wouldn't go amiss.
We okay on this, guys?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely fine. Yeah, no problem at all. Great.
Colin, next question.
Okay. We have a fuchsia bush that looks as though the tips of the branches are all deformed. Any suggestions for what it might be and treatment?
I have no suggestions, so I'll go over to Waheed. How about you, Waheed?
Yeah, I'm not totally sure. Yeah, you put me under pressure now. No, it's not something I've come across before, actually. Matt, have you come across it?
I think, if I may just chip in, I suspect it may be fuchsia gall mite. They actually sort of cause sort of galls, as their name suggests, and deformities at the end of the leaves. It's a fairly, at the end of the shoots, it's a fairly recent introduction into Britain. Came originally it's believed from Brazil. I think it had an odd origin. Just goes to show actually that when we're moving plants around the world, and that's how many of the pests and diseases have been dispersed, unfortunately. I remember actually at the Eden Project years ago when I wrote the book, they had this sort of fantastic quarantine system whereby when new plants came in, they spent, and I've probably got the timing wrong, but 6 months to a year in a small case surrounded by insect netting, so that any problems as they went through their growing season could be sort of either caught and identified or treated before the plants went into the biomes or into the main areas, because obviously if you introduce something into those, it could be catastrophic. Back to the fuchsia gall mite, then there's no real way of controlling them. There's no chemical control or anything like that. So the only way of controlling them really is cutting back the affected foliage right down to ground level, and then disposing of it away from the garden. So it's a really important thing that you should do, is to go around your garden and your greenhouse and all your gardening space really every day if you can, to look at the state of your plants, because if you get pests and disease problems, it's a heck of a lot easier to catch them earlier rather than when you see there's a big population or a big problem, and then try and get rid of them. When I was a student, actually, they had at Kew, they had irrigation systems, and I'm sure they'll do this at the Eden Project, is that they had irrigation systems to provide the basic irrigation, but we had to go around and water the plants individually every day for this sort of husbandry type of thing, so that we would look at the plants and know what a healthy plant looked like, learn the names hopefully, but particularly to look out for pests and diseases. So with this one, just cut the plant down to the base and dispose of the infected parts away from the garden. But it is becoming an increasing problem amongst fuchsias and fuchsia growers in the UK, I'm afraid.
Sounds like sound advice. Catherine, anything to add on that?
No, I wasn't familiar with that. I know quite frequently if plants have aphids or green fly, that sort of thing on the tips, just as the young leaves are unfurling, that can make distortion. So that's something you have to look out for if you're seeing distorted growth on the tips, that you might have got aphid or black fly in the tips.
Okay, Colin, next question, please.
Add a little bit on the fuchsia gall mite first of all.
Oh, excellent.
I have come across it before. There is a biological control, but it's only really going to work once you've got it a little bit under control and cut back to begin with. Now, the name of it I can't remember, but a search for it will find it. Also, there are some resistant cultivars. Again, names not on the top of my head, but if you have a search for them on the internet or elsewhere, then I'm sure you'll find some. The next question is, I have a huge Montana clematis, which last year we cut down to get fresh bloom. Unfortunately, this year we only had a few flowers. Is it true, bloom before June, don't prune? As it flowers again later in the year, when is the best time to cut it back?
I'll open this up to the team.
Could I just say with Clematis Montana, it's an interesting plant, really, really vigorous, absolutely wonderful for covering large areas. And you would think that something that vigorous would take a good hack back and be revived. And if you wanted to regenerate a plant, then you can take the risk of chopping it back to about a foot above the ground. And when I first did that, I thought, oh yeah, no problem at all. You know, such a vigorous thing. It'll come, you know, big muscles. It'll be straight back. Well, I chopped it back at a client's garden and that was the end of it. So if you do that hard pruning technique, which generally works, it doesn't come with a guarantee. So I would say there's probably about a 90% chance of a success, and I was one of the 10%, unfortunately. But the usual thing to do with Clematis Montana is to let them grow into their space, trim them to keep them within their allotted space, like if they threaten to go too far, and do your trimming and tidying straight after flowering. And if you're looking for Clematis Montana because you like them, and they are wonderful plants, there's an incredible lady called Val Limay Neville Parry, who has the national collection of Clematis Montana. And she's been doing some breeding with them, with other varieties, to create some hybrids. And she's produced Clematis Montanas or Montana types, which are much, much smaller, so are suitable for training up the front of the house. And one of the plants that she's actually kept going is Clematis Montana Clematis veitchii, sorry, and that won Plant Heritage Plant of the Year this year. So I'm hoping there might be a sort of resurgence in Montana types, a resurgence of interest, and it will allow more people to grow them because they're so beautiful.
And on a cautionary note on that particular plant, they always look very, very good during the Chelsea Flower Show. And so if you're building a Chelsea Flower Show garden and suddenly feel that you really need one and it's looking good in your garden, don't dig it up like I did and try to get away with it. It will certainly die. And I'm lucky that I'm still married. Colin, next question. Oh, Waheed, you were coming in there.
Oh yeah, no, I was just going to briefly mention that with clematis, you have to be careful because the timing of the pruning depends on exactly when they flower. And actually, you normally tend to get 3 groups of clematis: the early flowering, the kind of the mid-season flowering, and also the late flowering ones. And the pruning depends on what type it is. So it's well worth, if you don't know when it flowers, keep the name tag and let it flower, and then you'll be able to find out the best pruning method for that.
Thanks, Waheed. Colin.
Okay, next one is about beetroot. The plants have flourishing leaves, but the roots don't develop properly. They've tried 2 varieties over 2 years and applied compost thickly over the whole patch. Any advice?
I did see this question in advance and I immediately wrote the initials MB. So over to MB.
Right, okay, thank you very much. Beetroot. Beetroot, a great cool season crop, and with them and a lot of the root crops, you have to be careful with the watering. They need a good soak. Well, we'll water them regularly until they're established. Obviously, as seedlings, they will need that water. But once they've got going, then don't overwater. And you're better to water about once every 3 or 4 days, depending on the weather, and give the ground a good soaking, because you want the roots to go down into the ground in search of water. And if the water just remains near the surface, they just soak it up and the leaves grow. So it's a little and often with the watering with beetroot and a lot of your root crops. Keep that ground moist, but don't just keep everything near the surface. Otherwise, you'll just get tiny little roots with lots and lots of leaf. Make sure that they have to work hard and send that taproot down into the soil. Same with radishes and carrots as well.
Thanks, Matt. We okay, guys? On to next question then, Colin.
Next question. Do you have any advice on avoiding unwanted mushroom growth in growing containers in a greenhouse? Often find them popping up alongside lettuces and getting concerned about contamination. The plants are not overwatered, but it's definitely damp inside.
Waheed? No?
Yes, I think one of the main mushroom growth can come through a lot of soils that are bought. I mean, the spores from mushrooms can spread very far and very easily too. So often that's one potential source of mushroom growth, and also from things like bark chippings. Once you've applied some bark chippings on areas, you often see various mushrooms popping up. Now, usually they're fairly harmless as a general sense, unless you do have things like honey fungus, which can cause a bit more of a destructive growth. But usually things like sterilizing your tools, kind of trying to keep your pots clean every winter, sort of having these habitual tasks at certain times of the year can try to eliminate them. I don't know, what do you think, Catherine?
And what you said about the spores, so fungus spores are so tiny and spread really easily, so really good hygiene in the winter is essential if you do want to try and avoid having the mushrooms come up year on year. But particularly with pots, if you're changing your compost and putting in fresh compost, then hopefully you will avoid it for the following year. But in reality, most of these mushrooms aren't going to cause your plants too many problems. And I would say if you're good at growing mushrooms, lots of people can't grow mushrooms, so maybe grab that opportunity and maybe try and grow some real mushrooms to eat.
Matt?
All I would say is that when they come up in the greenhouse, I just pull them off. I have no great problem with them. It's normally a time of year, humidity, but they're doing what they do, and that's breaking down the organic matter that's in the compost. Sometimes if you've used spent mushroom compost as a mulch, then the mushrooms that come up are edible fungi. So that's one of the bonuses, if you like, of using spent mushroom compost. But most that appear in the greenhouse, I just sort of pick them off. I suppose I should take a bit more interest in them and get my mushroom identification book out, or just have a look on mushroom websites. But generally, those that are in the greenhouse aren't causing any many problems, and they're an exciting world of their own.
They always look a bit scary to me, but as a landscaper, I'm keeping out of this conversation. Colin, next question, please.
Okay. There's a volunteer in a local community garden, and they'll be creating a rockery. What plant and type of soil do you suggest for it that will require minimal maintenance?
I'll kick off this one because the biggest problem usually with this type of project is that people buy what appear to be miniature type looking conifers, and after about 10 years there is no rockery left, and it's all the juniper or a chamaecypress or something. Again, I mean, plants that are really tough and show off the rockery plants like sedum, for example, and various succulents and ajuga. These are all good plants for that type of project, tough as old boot. Waheed?
Yeah, one of my favorites for that kind of rockery alpine environments are the aubretias. And these are great. They come in all sorts of beautiful lavenders and purples, and they look great on low banks, over low walls, a real classic alpine plant. And you can accompany that with things like arabis or even alyssumum, which is also a nice addition. And like I mentioned, they come in all sorts of great, bright colors, and importantly, they're good for pollinators too. So it's a kind of a good all-rounder.
How about the other two?
Could I just add, when you're making your rockery, I assume it's not one you're taking over, but one you're making, just have a look at pictures of natural strata, because the one thing, if you want to upset Paul, is to actually make a plum pudding rockery, and just sort of make a heap of soil and stick stones into it.
We call it marbles dropped in porridge in the trade, Matt.
Okay, marbles. Well, don't do marbles dropped in porridge. Go and have a look at some pictures of strata and get those rocks coming out of the ground and get little fractures in them. It takes longer to do, but I tell you what, you get a piece of natural landscape and a piece of art. And the other thing that I would do is, because you've got the opportunity to fill pockets of soil, make sure you have some acidic areas, some free draining, some alkaline, so you can grow a whole range of pots. If you're creating a big rockery, then of course you'll have a shady side as well. And this is a great opportunity, I think, to visit. There's been several rock garden restorations. There's one going on at Newby Hall in Yorkshire at the moment. There's been one at a place in Sheffield, a park in Sheffield. Google it, find out, and go and visit there, because I think to go and visit a rockery or a rock garden gives you a real idea of what they were like in the great era of rock gardens. And then when it comes to planting, well, just go to the specialist nurseries again. We must support these specialist nurseries. I mentioned the small seed companies as well. Spend time sort of digging around, sort of having a look at them, going to plant fairs to get your plants, because they all need supporting. If we lose our small nurseries, then we lose our diversity of plants and choice of plants for the garden. So it's really, really important. But favorite plants, creeping plants, Lithodora diffusa, which is very, very low growing, likes chalky soil, evergreen carpet with the most beautiful blue aquamarine blue almost flowers. That's great. Gaultheria procumbens, another of my favorites, creeping plant at this time of year, producing lots and lots of red berries. So I would go to the small. Am I allowed to mention names?
Yeah, go ahead.
Potterton's nursery are absolutely brilliant. Kevok Plants, just in Scotland, have got some amazing plants too, and Edram nurseries. There's also a great little alpine nursery at near Bodnant, and it's called, I think it's called Aberconway Plants. But they've got some great little plants. Heartside nurseries, we've got Roscoias. So go and do your research, and you'll get some superb plants, and make it sort of like the jewel in your community. So if everybody comes and plants, and it's great for the children because you've got perhaps little cushion plants, they're children sized, if you like, you know, they're not dominated by giant trees, then you'll be able to, you know, get something that belongs to all, with loads of varieties from the, you know, the alpine zones of the world. Very exciting project. Good luck with it.
Thanks, Matt. Well, we've come to that sad point in time where we're starting to wrap up now. Guys on the team, you know, you've been fantastic. Is there anything you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yes, I would. I'd just like to say thank you very much indeed for listening. Thank you very much indeed for gardening. It's just like the best hobby and the best interest in the world, indoors or out. And the other thing is, keep gardening through the lockdown. Garden yourself through the COVID epidemic, and you will be fine. You will be absolutely fine. So just stick with the plants because they'll never let you down, and take care of the earth. Fantastic. Waheed, thank you for coming.
Thank you. No, it's lovely to be here and lovely to answer your questions. I think the final something to think about from my side is that we know that wildlife populations are in decline for many reasons, and especially for native plants that they vastly depend on. They're fast disappearing. So when you're gardening, spare a thought for the whole ecosystem, the whole interweb of life on Earth, and think about the biodiversity that comes into your garden, because it's their garden just as it is yours.
Thanks, Waheed. Catherine, thank you so much. Was there anything that you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we garden and it helps our own well-being, but we shouldn't forget that it also really helps those around us as well. So if we create a beautiful garden, a beautiful space, it has a knock-on effect to every person who walks by and can increase the well-being of those around us.
Thanks, Catherine. Well, my apologies for personally appearing in the dark off and on, because I'm in an office where the lights go off automatically, which is a good thing sustainably, but maybe not so good for media activities. Anyway, we hope that you've enjoyed the session, everyone.